Hello, folks. This is Michelle Weens from Performance High. And today on our Facebook Live, I am talking about a topic which I've just kind of started to think a little bit more about, and I thought I'd share a few thoughts with you to see how it resonates with y'all. And that is the idea of mobility versus flexibility. These two terms get used interchangeably a lot. In fact, I think I've done it myself more than a couple times. Said one when I meant the other. So I just thought I'd talk a little bit about the differences between the two, why you might want to consider moving more towards the mobility side of things than the flexibility side, how they're different, and what the implications for each mean. So that's what our topic is today: mobility versus flexibility, and why you really want mobility as opposed to just flexibility. So, the implications for the body are very different for those two things. Not only are the definitions different, but they also have different effects on the body. So that's what we're going to kind of get into. And just to start off, there's this concept, or there is a concept that I'd like you to consider, which is the idea that just because you're flexible does not mean that you're mobile or mobile. So we'll kind of piece through that and see how that comes out on the other side once we're working into the concepts. So to start with flexibility, flexibility is, think of it this way, more of the specific thing. And basically just a general, I just said specific, right? So a more generalized definition of flexibility is the ability of that muscle to lengthen temporarily. So we all know flexibility stretches, oftentimes they're passive stretches. They're done sitting, sometimes standing, laying down, and basically we just, put a muscle into a position that is stretched and lengthened, and then we hold it. So just a really easy example I can do sitting here in a chair is if I want to stretch my hamstring, I put my arm up over the top of my head, put my hand down my back, reach down my back, and then I take my other hand and I gently pull across to try to pull that arm into midline, and that stretches the tricep and starts to lengthen that muscle out. So that's typically what we think of when we think of flexibility work, is we think of passive stretching. There are other kinds, but that's very commonly what we do to make a muscle lengthen, or to try to lengthen and stretch out a muscle. Because I was not 100% sure about how to talk about this topic, I contacted one of my physical therapy friends, Matt Booth, who is the director and also physical therapist at Therapeutic Associates Southeast Boise. That's where I go and where I send a lot of my athletes is to their office. And I just asked him what his thoughts were about the differences between mobility and flexibility. And on flexibility, he said, or something to this effect, he said, stretching lengthens, reduces tone, and can reduce athletic performance when done prior to exercise. So obviously it lengthens the muscle out. What he means by reducing tone, which is a concept that I actually had to clarify with him, because I think of tone as like muscle definition and size, that kind of thing. He means tone in terms of the activation of the muscle. So stretching obviously reduces the tone, which means that it increases the relaxation in that muscle. It takes the tension down. So that's what he means by that. And studies have shown that it can reduce athletic performance if you passively stretch prior. So there's been lots and lots of great studies done on this. One of the first ones I saw was on weightlifters, and basically it had them, do a chest stretch or something before they sat down and do a heavy bench press. And if they stretched beforehand, if they passively stretched before they did that lift, they could not lift as much weight as if they didn't stretch beforehand. So that those studies came out quite a while ago, and we've since been telling folks that if you want to passively stretch, you do it at the end of your workout and not at the beginning, primarily because passive stretching also tends to make things looser. And when we're trying to get performance benefits, particularly if we're looking at activities that require a fair amount of springiness or quickness, things like sprinting, jumping, that kind of stuff. We actually want a little muscle tension, and we want a little ligament and joint tension in there to help those activities. So the flexibility stretching, the static stretching really should be done at the end. Also, the additional piece of flexibility is that it doesn't really address how that muscle and joint is being used. It's just simply there to stretch the muscle out and make it longer. So it doesn't really get into motion patterns and how that muscle is ultimately going to be used if we're active. That's where mobility comes in. So if we go to mobility, it's more of a global concept. It's the big picture concept. It's the ability of a joint to move through its full range of motion in a controlled manner. So it's a very active process rather than a passive process. And the kicker in this statement is in a controlled manner. So you might have a super flexible joint, and this is a lot of times where people that have sort of inherent flexibilities, folks that are double jointed, we all know those people that have super good flexibility even though they don't do anything, they were just sort of born that way. Those folks can actually be at a higher risk for injury because they're so flexible that they can move in sort of uncontrolled manners unless they're really, really dedicated to being on top of technique and strength training and that kind of stuff. So the kicker in mobility is that you can move through a wide range of motion, but in a very controlled way. So that is something that for athletes especially, and actually for folks that are just looking to have, better day-to-day life, don't necessarily have to be an athlete, but better day-to-day living, less injury risk, that kind of stuff. Mobility is actually the way that we want to go, because if we can control our muscles, joints better, and yet we also have a good amount of range of motion on them, then our injury risks obviously go way down, and the performance benefits go way up too. So that's kind of a cool thing with mobility work. So again, back to Matt Booth, the PT director at at Therapeutic Associates. Mobility is focusing on moving better and controlling that motion, which is kind of just what we talked about. So the idea that you will not only have a better motion pattern because your range of motion is bigger, but also because you can control that range of motion better as well. So how do we control the motion? What are the things that are required to control motion? So first off, we have to coordinate a bunch of different systems. Okay, so there are, let's think about all the things that are involved in moving a joint. There's muscles, tendons, ligaments, fascia, cartilage, bones, and then your neuromuscular system, which is your brain to muscle connection. All of those systems, and there's probably some more that I didn't even think about or mention, but all of those systems have to work together in order to create a really nice motion pattern. So first off, coordinating all of those systems is critical towards getting everything to work right. Because if you have any one of those not working well, it can throw the whole motion pattern off, and then of course we have problems. So first off is coordination of lots and lots of different systems within the body. Second piece to controlling motion is making some improvements in a couple different things. And we want improvements in strength of all of the different pieces. So we want improvements in bone strength, ligament strength, tendon strength, muscle strength. We want those kind of improvements made. So a stronger system. And then we also want a full range of motion. So bigger range of motion for all of those things as well. So those two pieces combined are what give us excellent mobility. So more strength for the control and more flexibility as well. More range of motion, I should say. Put those two things together and we have a really good mobility system. Let's see. Strength and flexibility. So again, just to kind of rehash that, strength and flexibility are going to work together. That's what we want. And the way that is going to work best is if we improve our motor patterns. So motor patterns are the brain to muscle connections. That's the two talk to each other. The brain sends the signal down, the muscles send signals back, the brain translates those and sends more signals down, and the muscles respond, and so forth and so on, and you get a motor pattern. You get a movement out of that. And so the way to improve that motor pattern is obviously technique training. So lots and lots of technique training can help with our mobility. It helps us learn how to control our different body parts and move them in the ways that we need them to move. So that's one part and piece. And then the second part to that is also creating a really steady, strong base to move from. So in many sports, well, in all sports really, we need to have a core stability component, and core stability is really the piece that kind of links everything together, because we don't have a strong core, and that really is bigger than just your abs. That's kind of, I define it as from my shoulders down to my kneecaps and all the way around. So all those systems that connect, that are our midsection. If those are not strong and stable, then our limbs, our arms and legs, start to do some crazy things. So we get very disjointed and very segmented. And if we want the body to move in a whole coordinated pattern, then that core stability is kind of the linchpin to the whole thing. So mobility exercises are kind of a good way to go. They're really good to incorporate into your warm-ups, cool downs, that kind of stuff, and then just kind of on a daily basis to kind of keep you moving well. I will have a video coming out shortly that has some demonstrations of some mobility exercises, so look for that soon. That will be on YouTube, and it will be posted on Facebook as well, so look for that in the next little bit if you're interested in mobility work. And if you liked this video, please hit the like button, share it with somebody who you think might enjoy it, and follow Performance High on Facebook so you don't miss a thing. And I will see you next week. Thanks for joining me on this little chat about mobility and flexibility. Thanks so much. Have a great day.